Hello, thank you for attending this talk. My name is Afonso. I work as a DevOps engineer at Collabra, and I'm currently based in Portugal near Porto. And this is the first time that I'm speaking here at DjangoCon. I've been using Django professionally for about 2 years, mainly developing internal time tracking tools and some financial tools. In this talk, we are going to explore different lightweight front-end solutions that do not require building a whole single-page application project. We will see how they integrate with Django development and the advantages and disadvantages of each one of the approaches. As you know, Django is a full-stack framework that follows the model view and template architecture. This means that traditionally a Django server is responsible for all the application layers, from the database models to the template rendering process. So this was the most common pattern in web development. The browser would simply send a request to the server, the router would call the appropriate view, and then the view would respond with an HTTP response containing the rendered HTML. So this architecture delegates all of the work to the server. If we wanted to add a bit more of interactivity with the client, we would also send some pieces of JavaScript in the response, and then the browser would execute them. This architecture pattern is fine for most websites that do not require high user interactivity and are mostly static. However, we've seen in recent years a shift towards single-page application architecture, where the front end is completely separated from the back end. So in this case, the back end would be a normal Django service that exposes an API, can be a REST API or a GraphQL API, and is responsible for handling the database, the services, the tasks, and it is within this API that the front end will communicate and retrieve data. So the front end will be usually built around a JavaScript framework like React or Vue or Angular, and this front end is now responsible for rendering the templates and fetching the data from the API. So the browser will communicate directly with this front end, not with the server like previously. And then the front end is responsible for communicating with the back end, retrieving the data, the results, and exposing them to the user in an HTML response. This new kind of architecture brings many benefits to the development. I think the biggest one is that there is now a clear separation between what is the front end and what is the back end, and they can be developed independently between each other as long as they both agree on the same API. This might be suitable for bigger teams with lots of people. It might make development easier and more quick. And also because the backend is now required to have an API for the front end to communicate, it requires an API to exist. So this API can also be used by other clients, like mobile apps, which might be useful in the future, and it also decouples the front end from the back end. So as long as the API remains the same, it is okay to switch front end technology, front end frameworks, as long as we keep the same API. And now that the front end is all JavaScript, all based around the JavaScript framework, it usually provides a better user experience, because users do not need to wait for the page to reload, because the JavaScript framework will include a router that will do all of this for us, and it's also usually a more modern user experience with having this approach. And being that the front end is only a set of static JavaScript files, it makes it also really easy to deploy the front end, because it's just a matter of hosting these static files. So there's no need of a server to actually run the front end. That's another advantage. And at least there is we by using JavaScript on the front end, we now have access to the whole Node.js ecosystem, which is quite big and contains solutions for almost all of the problems that one might encounter during developing projects. As usual, this architecture also brings some disadvantages and drawbacks that might be worth to consider before chasing it. The biggest one is the complexity that it brings to the project. So until now, we only need to know Python, Django, and a bit of HTML, CSS, and a bit of JavaScript, and we would be able to develop a full stack application from one from the top to the bottom. But now with single page applications, we are required to learn another whole technology layer, Node.js, NPM, webpack, babel, the framework, React, Vue, or Angular. We need to be aware of the whole Node ecosystem and context switching between Python and JavaScript during project development sometimes might be difficult and tiresome. Sometimes working in JavaScript environments might feel a bit overwhelming, like you can see in this comic of this green dinosaur found on Peter Yang blog. There's a lot of different tools to learn and to study, and it increases the complexity of project development always. When working with Django backends and JavaScript frontends, we kind of lose some of the stuff that Django gives us for free. For example, with a front-end framework, it does not make sense to use Django forms, although Django forms are really useful because they provide automatic rendering and validation and model integration. And we also cannot use some of Django templates filters, which are also useful because everything front-end related is now handled by the JavaScript page. And because of this also makes the page harder to test. So now to test previously when doing server-side rendering, testing the front end is quite easy. We just fire up Django test client and do a bunch of requests to the server, and we then compare the HTML response and check their structure if it is correct. Now that we use a JavaScript framework, to test the framework, we need to either use some of the framework testing modules like Jest, or we might even need to create end-to-end testings with Selenium, for example, to be able to run the whole window with all of the JavaScript loaded. And this also can affect accessibility and search engine optimization. Although recently it's been more easier to make this work with the recent changes in these frameworks, because previously the web pages were normal HTML files, which are documents that contain metadata, so crawlers can download and understand what is inside the document. Single page applications return an almost empty HTML document, which just contains the script tag and the init code. So search engines cannot understand very well what information, what kind of metadata is present there. Another increase in complexity is that we are now required to build an API for the backend. So sometimes a project might not be that big, and it might not be worth it to take some time to develop a separate REST API when we can directly use the templates and the old Django views to provide the functionality that the users want. And at last, there's also there can be also some coordination and development challenges when working with multiple projects. So, for example, let's assume that there is one team working in the front end and then another team working in the back end, and they decide that each one of them will run their own repository, and they will communicate with REST. It makes things a bit difficult to test and use as a whole. So we now need to keep track of two different repositories. We need to keep track of the versions between both of them. So that might make development a bit trickier. So we get to the question that gives the name to this talk. Do we really need a full JavaScript frontend? And the answer, as usual in software engineering, is it depends. It depends if the project is big or small. It depends on the size of the team. It depends on the skills available in the team. It depends on the client expectations on user reactivity and user experience. So it depends on multiple factors. As a general rule of thumb, I would say that traditional crude applications, which do not require lots of reloading, are fine to be built with traditional server-side rendering and traditional Django, and that websites that behave more as applications that we want instant reactivities, stuff like Google Maps, for example, they are more suited to use a single-page architecture on that regard. For the rest of the talk, we will be exploring a third way, a more hybrid approach between these two that we discussed previously, which is called progressive enhancement. This means that we will start with a traditional Django website, and we will improve the user experience. We will improve its reactivity by adding lightweight front-end tools on top of that, so that at the end the website will be usable even without JavaScript. So we keep the accessibility benefits and the search engine optimization benefits. But when JavaScript is enabled, the website will bring user experience improvements. We will now work on an example, talks website that allows users to manage the talk submission for a given conference, like this one. I know, not very creative. So this will basically be a simple crude management app. It will allow create, list, update and deleting talks. The source code is available at GitHub on the address that shows up here on the screen. And the application is also deployed, is currently running live on Heroku. So you can access there too on the link on this slide. Okay, to start, we start defining the main model for this website after the project is generating using Django admin start project. And we start by defining the talk model, which contains a title for the talk, a description, and a speaker. The speaker will be a foreign key for the user model. So that's only it. The talk will be composed by a title, a description, and a speaker. We now create the views for doing these crude operations on the talks model. We will create a list view, a detail view, a create, update, and delete view. I'm using here in this example the generic class-based views so that I can keep the code short and smaller, and they do what we need to do in this example. We also need to define the URL patterns for this application. This is a quite general Django URL patterns file here. We define the paths for the list, for the create, for the detail, for the edit, and for the deletion views, so that we can do all of the crude operations by accessing these URLs here. This is how it will look like. I'm using Bootstrap 5. I'm not showing the templates here because I don't think it's worth it for what we are trying to do. But so far you can see the list view of the talks. You see we have a table which displays the title, the description, the speaker, and we also have quick actions shortcuts for editing and deleting the view. the talk, sorry. This is how the detailed page looks like. So as you can see, very simple stuff. Again, with the edit and delete buttons as shortcuts to those views. And here is the add talk template view. This is where we render the forms, standard bootstrap stuff, and where we can create new talks in this website. The first lightweight front-end library that I'm introducing here is called HTMX. It was previously known as Intercooler.js, and it allows to use data attributes inside HTML for performing AJAX requests, for performing CSS transitions, accessing WebSockets, and even server-sent events. It is really small library. It's only 10 KB with no dependencies, so it's self-runnable. You just need to point out to a CDN, and we have this library ready to run. It is quite useful because it extends the normal HTML syntax, allowing for a more declarative approach when building interactions. And it does not depend on using a language like JSON for transmitting data. It's actually quite reliant on servers responding with HTML. So similar to how server-side rendering pages work. So HTMX allows us to perform these asynchronous requests to the server. The server will respond with an HTML content, and then HTMX can swap an HTML block with the server response. So this is really useful for adding more interactivity to the web page without having to write custom JavaScript code, and without having to create a new REST API, because we can use the old HTML rendering like it was an API. This is a really small example stolen from HTMX website. We can see how simple and powerful this library is. So we start by loading it from the CDN, loading the JavaScript, and this snippet will display a button that when we click on that button, it will perform an asynchronous JavaScript request to the server, to the /clicked URL, and then we'll replace the whole button with the HTML response from the server. So here we are already seeing some HTMX directives like hx post, which defines the URL to perform the post. So this is really nice, because we can now perform post requests without requiring an HTML form. We can use any element to do this kind of requests. And then we have the directive hx swap, which defines which element to swap with the server response. Now, going back to the talks website example that I talked about earlier, let's say we want to implement a new feature. We want to be able to search through the different talks, but we want to do it to do an active search. So this means there will be a search bar at the top, and we want that when the user starts typing, the results start filtering automatically without needing to reload the page or opening another page like it was a single page application. So here we define a different view for that. We define a search view that is inheriting from the list view just for convenience. And this search view will render an HTML table with the content, and it will check for a queue parameter in the request get parameters. And based on this query string, it will filter the talk list. Here we can see the template for this. So it's a regular table. We iterate through the different talks and render each row. The most important thing to notice on on this template is that the table has an ID, and this ID will be used in the next slide for selecting this table. This is how this search page looks like. So it looks quite similar to the talks list page, but without the headers, because we are only interested in rendering the tables. And now to actually perform the search on the talk list page, we need to create a new input, an input that allows the user to type and search. And what will this input do? This input will perform a GET request to the view that we defined previously. So we can see in the directive hxget, it will point to the search page that we just created. And we also need to define what will trigger these requests, and the trigger will be whenever the user types something on the search bar. So we will use the kup event, and we can even define a delay for performing the request so that the users do not abuse the server. And at last, we also need to define where to substitute the returned HTTP response. So we need to define where this replacement occurs, and it will happen in the table that we defined previously. So basically the invoice list page will perform asynchronous requests to the search page whenever the user writes something on that text bar, and then it will replace the current table with the results that the server responded to. This is a small demonstration of how it is working at the moment. As you can see, it allows users to instantly search, and we didn't write any JavaScript code to achieve this, right? We relied on HTMX and simple data attributes to do so. So this is a progressive enhancement of the page. Previously, we had the static page rendering the table. We added a static page for searching through the different talks, and now combining HTMX, we are able to dynamically do this filtering. So here we are kind of having the best of both worlds, since we keep all of traditional Django benefits, but we're also improving the user experience by having this instantaneous search right here on this page. Similar to HTMX, Alpine.js is a minimal, small JavaScript library that does not require any build step when using it, and it allows for composing JavaScript behavior directly in the markup with a syntax that is inspired by view template expressions. It is quite suitable for simple user interaction, since it allows for an easy way to manipulate the DOM in a declarative way. The only downside is that it does not use virtual DOM, so it's regular node manipulation. So if it is not advisable to use it for bigger applications, for bigger pages that process a lot of data. So similar to Vue, we can define a model there. We can define the transformations, and all by using template expressions. Here is a quick example on how to use Alpine.js. We are going to model a tab behavior here. So similarly to the other tools we presented here, we start by loading the library from CDN, and similar to Vue templates, we are defining here the data model for this component. In this case, we want to store in the model the name of the tab that is currently active. Okay, so next we have two buttons which will trigger a change on this model. So we use the property onClick to say that to update the model whenever these buttons are clicked, and then we have the actual content of each tab. And here we are using the attribute xShow that allows us to specify a condition for whether or not the current element should be displayed or not. In this case, we will display the tab foo if the current tab defined in the model is foo, and the same applies for bar. So as you can see, it's really similar to Vue templates, but much more lightweight. Now, going back again to our example of the Talks website, we are going to use Alpine.js to create an interactive text input similar to the ones you find on blogs or postings. So the idea is that we want to add a field called tags, like you can see here on this slide, and we want to dynamically type them and have the ability to add multiple tags to a talk. So for example, a talk can have a tag like Django, HTML, etc. Standard tag models. So we start by adding the text field to the talk model. Okay, so here I'm using a JSON field because I find it quite flexible, and since Django 3.2, it's been a great addition there. And I'm saying that by default it will be an empty list, so it's not entirely relational, but for the purpose of what we're building here is more than enough. We're now going to update the talks form template. This is the template that is used by the edit and by the create pages. And we want to display the tags and being able to add new tags as you type. So we will create a new div block, and we need to define the Alpine model for this component, and this model will contain basically the list of tags that were inserted and the name of the new tag that we want to append to this list. To initialize this model, we also want to initialize it with the tags that come from the model. So for example, if a talk already has 2-3 tags, we want them to appear as well and retrieve them from the model. We can do it fairly easily by using Django, by accessing the tags field in the template. Because text field is a JSON field, we can use it directly here when defining, so that makes this part much simpler. And of course, if there are no tags, we define it as an empty list. Then we define the input, which will be the actual input that is sent to the server, that contains a JSON value with a list of the different tags. In this case, we are using the xbind attribute to define that the value attribute of this input will depend on the tags defined in the Alpine model. So this will be an hidden input. It will not be shown in the UI, just to be sent to the server and stored there. And next, we will actually create the text box for introducing the tags. Okay, we will bind this one with the model, and basically what we are saying here with the x model equals new tag is that the values that we introduce here will be stored in the new tag variable in the model. And then we also add an attribute kdown enter prevent to prevent it for always updating the model if the string, if there is an empty string entered, so that it only triggers when there is a new push from the user after writing the tag. And the next block consists of a regular HTML5 template block. This is the one that contains the properties for displaying each tag. So we use the property x4 to iterate through the tags in the model. And for each one of these, we will display a span element that contains the tag name. We also can define the class as a bootstrap badge, for example. And then next to each tag, we will have a button that when we click it, will remove this tag from the model. So this button is a button to remove the tag, so it will update the model when we click it. At the end, this is how it looks like. So this is the same page as previously shown, and you are able to write a list of tags. They are stored in the database as a JSON list, and you can edit them and delete them directly with this input. Again, all of this just leveraging the capabilities of the framework. So we didn't write any custom JavaScript code again. We are using declarative data attributes. We are using regular Django forms. So it has been a progressive enhancement of what we already had here, just improving the user experience here with this new tags input. And later we could refactor it and create a custom Django widget for having this kind of special input by calling Alpine, but it's a bit out of scope of this talk. Yeah. The last tool that I want to show today is called Hotwire, which is a short for HTML over the wire, and it's a recent technology. It's still currently in beta and was developed by Basecamp and A.com, and it's the kind of the successor of TurboLinks, which existed for Rails and I think for Django too. So it basically gives the single page application experience to traditional server-side rendered pages. So like I said previously, in single page applications, there is a JavaScript router that is responsible for actually loading the pages and displaying them in the browser window. So it seems from the user point of view that the pages are loaded instantly because they are done asynchronously through JavaScript, and that makes that much faster. And this is what that library does, without requiring a full JavaScript front-end framework. So basically, we load this library at the top of the HTML file, and then this library will automatically parse the document and intercept all of the anchors, all of the links, and then will overwrite the default browser behavior for that page, and will take charge of the navigation. So even regular old pages will seem much faster to load because this page will handle that instead of the browser. So the pages will appear to be loading instantly, like they would on a single page application. I didn't create an example with this because it's still early. It's still in early development, and there is a non-official Django package to integrate with Django, but I didn't check it out. But I'm pretty sure in the future this will be a pretty great technology to build on top of. To conclude, I would like to share with you this quote from Leonardo da Vinci: "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." And I think this really applies to software engineering because as engineers, we have a tendency to overcomplicate things and over-engineer things. And sometimes there are simpler solutions that we do not even take into account because we are not aware of them. So yeah, that's what I wanted to discuss with you today. I'm really thankful for you for assisting to this talk, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I hope you have a great day, and goodbye.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for your talk. Does it I presume that you didn't use Alpine because HTMX can't do what you did with Alpine. You can do any of these actions or both these actions in either framework or either library.
Yeah, I wanted to show both of them here in this talk, but I think they fit kind of different use cases. HTMX requires more on the server to respond with fragments of HTML to inject into the DOM, and I think Alpine is more like a lightweight alternative to Vue.js, where you can directly manipulate the DOM there using the data attributes. So I would say that's the biggest difference between them. Like if it doesn't require anything from the server side, I think Alpine might be more suitable.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Have you used these in projects for customers yet, or?
No, not yet. Just hobby stuff.
Okay.
But I want to use it.
Yeah.
When I have the opportunity.
Thank you.
Hi, Afonso. First of all, great talk. Thank you. And you mentioned it in the beginning about progressive enhancement and the ability of making the application continue to work even in a scenario without JavaScript. Have you made some experiment about that with these three frameworks?
Not an experiment per se, but it was more like trying to use the page without JavaScript, like using no script extension in Firefox, for example. And at the moment, if you try to navigate the web without JavaScript enabled, almost nothing works in almost every site because they somehow require for something. But that's one thing that I wanted to approach with these small solutions, is because, for example, even if a user does not have JavaScript enabled on its browser, in the small example that I gave, you can still search the page. If you open that page without JavaScript, you can still go there and search and type enter, and it will return the list of results. So, like you were saying about progressive enhancement, it's about that, right? We start by we start by having a regular old-fashioned page and view, and then use JavaScript here and there to improve the user experience, and without the other going against the current trend, perhaps, of needing. If we try to open a page without JavaScript enabled, all we see is spinners loading, and sometimes nothing happens. But yeah, this kind of libraries are great for that, for just improving a bit small of pages that need more interactivity, that normal HTML cannot do for obvious reasons. So yeah, that's why.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. Actually, we are trying this kind of approach in production, but I didn't know until this conference about ATMX. So we were implementing some small layer of JavaScript ourselves because and in this documentation, in the ATMX documentation, look at for me that there's no that intention to make the framework, actually the site still works without the usage of JavaScript. And what's important for me about that, it's I mean, there's a lot of initiatives, for example, API first and mobile first, and all that it's aligned to progressive enhancement. And we have a lot of good collateral effects when you do that. For example, the code is usually simpler. So that's that's the why behind my question. So if you have some thoughts about that, it would be great to hear from you.
Yeah, I agree what you said in general. It might be helpful for these cases. I think an advantage is that you're writing normal HTML. So even if you're not using HTMX, you can just serve these HTML fragments as a backup plan in case the user cannot use JavaScript for example. So you can always have this kind of fallback, and because it's all sharing the same Django stack that we are reusing the views for that. You can use that to leverage this kind of enhancement.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you.
I hope it answers your question.
No, I'm really I'm glad to hear this talk, and I really want to reach you out to talk more about this approach. I'm really interested on that. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Now, if you guys are like free during the sprints, like we were talking during the previous talk, we could totally do a sprint to try to match your REST framework renderer strategies that can either respond JSON or HTML or something else with the HTMX approach. That would be super cool to try to bring that all together.
Yeah, that's a good idea. You can. Did somebody type it out in the Sprints channel? I think we can propose ideas there.
Yeah, but that was in the main room channel, but we should totally put that there, and everyone that wants to join could try to make it. Yeah.
Yeah, looks like a great idea. I'm trying to find it out in the chat.
Oh, it was during the previous talk, so yeah, that's way behind it. But I'll ping you. I'll ping everyone in the Sprints channel.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know if we have time because I think that the presentations has already started, but it's about PostgreSQL, I think. But if you want to stay a little bit more, I have one thing to ask you.
Yeah, sure.
But it will really be easier if I share my screen because it's a real example. And that is, okay, let me try this. Okay, can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have let's say a piece of land here, and this is a Django application, okay, and it's a traditional one, request response. So these are the irrigations I have made to my field, and I want to add an irrigation. So let's say that yesterday I watered the piece of land with 200 cubic meters of water, and I click submit. So now, the problem is that if I submit this form, then the list of irrigations must also change. So if I do it the traditional way, it reloads all the page again, okay, which is not what we want. And it added the irrigation here. But if this part is different, I don't know how to call it, component, a form, a reactive form, and I click submit, it communicates with the server, it gets a piece of HTML back with, let's say, HTMX or something, and then would it be possible to update that part? Would I need some JavaScript, maybe a little JavaScript?
Yeah, I think you can. I think that's a pretty good use case for HTMX, actually. You can bind that submit button that you had on the form on the left to perform a post request normally, like you do for a form, and then using the HTMX directives. I think there is one that you can bind other elements to this action. So basically what you need to do is to, on the list that you were showing up on the right side, the one that needed to be updated, the submit button on the left would need to, or better, the list that you were displaying on the right side, there would need to be like an endpoint that always retrieves the list. And when you click at the submit button, it would trigger a GET request there too, with the HTML fragment for the list. Yeah, I think that could work there in that case.
Yeah, it would work, I think, yes. Okay. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. I think everyone is going to go to the next talk too. Goodbye. If you need anything, just ping me on Slack then.